God, now you can see Patty, but not me. What's more important though, am I right? We flattened our couch out to really like lounge this weekend, and we've just kept it this way because it's very comfortable. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Chloe and I'm here today to do part one of a two-part September book wrap-up. I don't know if you recall, I read 17 books in August and I was like, this is wild, I'll never read this many books again. And then September happened and I read 18 books, and I thought that the August video, I think it was like over 25 minutes long, which was a long time to film, it was a long time to edit, I'm sure it was a long time to watch, so I figured I would split September. So the way that I'm dividing these is this video, I'm going to be sharing the 10 adult books that I read in September, and the next video is going to be the 8 young adult YA. That's how this is going to work this month, but right now we're going to be talking about the 10 quote-unquote adult books that I made it through in September, and some really good ones, some not so good ones. Let's just get started, shall we? The first book that I read this month was The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I'm pretty sure the US version is 7.5 deaths and the Canadian and UK versions are 7 deaths. I'm not sure why that is. If anybody knows, please enlighten me. I don't know why Americans need to die more. I didn't know anything about this book going in. I didn't see it coming at all. So basically this book follows a man named Aiden, who isn't really Aiden throughout this entire book, because he wakes up one morning in the body of a person in a place that he's unfamiliar with, and is basically told that he has 8 days in 8 different bodies to try to figure out who murdered Evelyn Hardcastle. I'm not going to share much more than that because I think it's kind of cool to just follow the twists and turns and figure out what's happening in this book as it goes. I think that this would actually be a really cool book to reread after having read it once, because I'm sure that so many things went over my head. I know that I'm like several years late with this book and that everybody was reading this a couple years ago. It's like a murder mystery in a book form is really what this is, and it was really fun. I've never read anything like it. It kind of reminded me of Clue, but also a very specific thing. There was an immersive theater experience in New York called Sleep No More, and this book really reminded me of that, if anybody has done that or heard of it. It, I think, is an excellent book for this time of year. It's not like inherently Halloween-y, but it does kind of give those vibes, and I think is a pretty good book to read around this time of the year. There's lots of different twists. It's super fun. The setting and the characters are really well developed and are really vivid, fun, cool book. The next book that I will chat about is Split Tooth by Tanya, tagaq. This is really a genre-bending book, and it actually took me until probably nearly the end of the book to realize that it actually wasn't a memoir. The author is an Inuk woman who's actually also a critically acclaimed throat singer. She grew up in Nunavut in the 1970s, and this book tells the story of a young girl growing up in Nunavut, and themes around like family violence and addiction and bullying and growing up in a very remote, underserved place. It tells the story of this girl growing up. She eventually gets pregnant and then is kind of navigating life while pregnant. There are elements of magical realism. I think that's probably the appropriate way to call it. And then also Inuit stories that are woven throughout this book. It also has really beautiful illustrations, which I wasn't expecting. Another book that's really unlike anything that I've ever read before. It is dark. I found myself having to reread things. So there are elements of nonfiction, elements of fiction, and I think it quite intentionally doesn't want to fit itself into one genre. So another excellent book. Next book up that I read is Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor. This is a book that was part of the Feminist Book Club box for the month of September. Part of the reason it was chosen for September is because September 15th to October 15th in the US is Latinx Heritage Month. This book takes place in a fictional town in Mexico and follows multiple points of view from people living in this town and is broadly centered around a witch who lives in the town and is murdered. Another book unlike anything that I've ever written before. The style of the book is totally unique. It's translated from Spanish. It doesn't follow a linear plot, so it's hard to even explain what happened, but it is another really dark, really beautiful, very violent, so a lot of triggers that I would definitely recommend looking into if you're interested in reading this, but also equally a really important book that kind of really takes a look at different systems of power and oppression operating within a community and how those culminate in extreme violence for almost everybody, particularly the women who live in this community. I won't share too much more than that. I did post an unboxing for the Feminist Book Club box for September, as well as a reading vlog of this book. So I would encourage you to go check that out if you're interested in learning a little bit more about this and sort of my experience reading it. It's also one that if you have the opportunity to read this with a friend or buddy read it or as part of a book club, I think that that would be a very good idea. Because I read it with the Feminist Book Club, there was a Zoom call after everyone had finished the book to go chat about it as a group, and I found unpacking it with other people was really valuable. Don't let that stop you from reading it if you don't have another person to read it with you. I'm also happy to chat about it with people if you can't find someone who's interested in reading it with you, but it's a good one to unpack with other people because there's a lot happening in here. Oh my god, I've read a lot of really good books this month. Next up, I am going to talk about Bunny by Mona Awad. I held off on reading this book for a while because I've heard super mixed things and it doesn't have that great of a rating on Goodreads. I think it's hovering around like a 3.5. So synopsis first, Bunny follows our main character Samantha, who is a master's student in like literature at a fancy school, I think somewhere in New England. And her program is really selective, really small. So it's just her and these 4 other girls in her program who have formed this sort of clique, and they call each other Bunny and are very, very grating, and Samantha really, really hates them. But inevitably, as sort of she goes through this program, the bunnies sort of start trying to befriend her, so she finds herself hanging out with them. And let's just say that they call each other Bunny for a reason. Yeah, weird shit starts to go down with like magic and conjuring, and yeah, this isn't your ordinary clique. It's super messed up. I felt like I was on drugs the entire time that I read this book. It is like a dark academia book, so a lot of the book centers around them in their classes or them sort of thinking about writing at the university in workshops, which I loved. I deeply relate to being in a fancy university environment and feeling like I don't belong. That I get it. It's a trip. Another one along with The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle that if you're looking for an eerie and unsettling book to read around October, I think that this is an excellent one. I would say it's categorized as horror. It didn't like make me lose sleep. It is a deeply weird book. I loved it because I like weird books. If you're not like a weird book person or you don't think that you could like weird books, you're probably not going to like this. So like I get why it has the reviews that it does on Goodreads, but I also think like it has a cute name and a cute cover, and I think people are maybe picking it up not realizing what the F it actually is. The best way that I can describe this book, my mind went to a weird combination of Mean Girls and Rocky Horror Picture Show with like a little bit of Frankenstein. So do with that what you will, but I really liked Bunny. Deeply strange, and I was here for that. Next up, we have Angela Y. Davis, Our Prison's Obsolete. Quite heavily annotated, this one. If you haven't heard of Angela Y. Davis, you should Google her. She is an incredible activist, scholar, who is really one of like the leading people who has championed and researched and advocated for prison abolition. And in this book, there's a lot of work that goes on in here, but ultimately what Davis does is challenges sort of the taken for granted assumption that prisons exist and that prisons should exist. And she asks, why is that something that we just assume is correct? Prisons came out of a very specific historical time where they were viewed as like progressive and designed to rehabilitate people. And first of all, we're not living in that historical time, but also it's silly to think that we think that our prisons are rehabilitating people, because the evidence shows that they're not, that they're designed to punish. The final chapter, she is exploring sort of what alternatives to abolition are, which I thought was incredible, because if you're someone who talks about or thinks about things like prison abolition, the question that you'll inevitably get from people is, well, what's the alternative? And I mean, read this book. I'm not articulating this anywhere near as well as Angela Davis does, obviously, but she's like, there isn't one alternative. Like, we need to get out of this thinking that there needs to be one institution, one thing that will just replace prisons, and then talking about sort of improving, revolutionizing systems like healthcare, decriminalizing drugs, decriminalizing sex work, needing to do so much work as a society around violence against women and gender-based violence. An excellent read, a necessary read, a short read, an accessible read.
What's going on over there?
We're just filming. You can't listen to us. Go away. Next book up is Jonny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. This is a memoir by a two-spirit indigiqueer author. The timeline of it kind of shifts between present day. He's living in Winnipeg and trying to get enough money to go back to the reserve he grew up on to attend his stepfather's funeral. But then he also looks back towards his childhood, particularly when he's writing in sort of modern day. He's also working as a sex worker, which I think is a narrative that you don't necessarily get in memoirs particularly often, and then sort of telling his story growing up as a queer kid on a reserve. And another part of the book, which I think I didn't really realize going in, but is something that really stuck with me, a lot of it is really sort of telling about the relationship between him and his grandmother, how impactful his grandmother was in his life, and I thought that piece was really beautiful. Again, lots of heavy themes in this one that I would recommend picking up, and also a fairly short read. Next up is the Subtweet by Vivek Shraya. You have possibly heard of I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shraya, and this is one of her, I think it's quite new, it just came out, and this book explores the relationship between two South Asian women who are musicians living in Toronto named Neela and Rukmini. Neela has sort of been around the block. She's had some success in the past, and then one day meets Rukmini, who is a huge fan of hers, and ends up covering one of Neela's songs that sort of launches her into fame. As the title would imply, a lot of this book does kind of take place over Twitter. There are some subtweets that fuel some drama. I thought this was such another kind of unique and really good book that kind of explores the music industry, which is something that I know nothing about, and what it's like to be a South Asian woman in the music industry. One of the characters is also trans, and social media, our relationship with social media, kind of just a slice of life narrative between these two women, going back and forth between their perspectives. One of the coolest things about this book is that the author Vivek Shraya is actually also a musician herself. When you purchase the book or the ebook, you actually also get access to an album of songs that are the same songs that are referenced throughout the book, which really kind of brings it to life in a really unique and really cool way. Both I'm Afraid of Men and the Subtweet were things that I really enjoyed. So yeah, I just spilled coffee everywhere. Now, because I've been sharing a lot about books that I did like, Dreadfulwater by Thomas King. I really wanted to like this book, and this was one where I knew if I liked this, there were several other books in this series that I was going to get to read, but sadly it just missed the mark for me. Dreadfulwater follows Thumps Dreadfulwater, who is a Cherokee ex-cop who kind of finds his way into a murder case that's going on in the town where he lives. Like, it wasn't bad, and I get why some people would really like this. Like, I think if you want a little bit of like the cheesy kind of mystery, and that is something that floats your boat, I think this might be a really good read for you. For me, I found the dialogue pretty corny at a lot of different parts. And like, I think intentionally corny, and I think it was supposed to be funny, but it wasn't funny for me. I just thought it was corny. The mystery wasn't all that surprising to me. I think it was cool to have a mystery that focused on an Indigenous main character with lots of Indigenous side characters as well. And that said, this is the first Thomas Kane book that I've read, but there are several other books that he's written that he's quite well known for, including The Inconvenient Indian and Green Grass Running Water, and several other books as well, but those two I mentioned because I own them, and both of those are books that I want to read and will still read. I started with this just because I was in the mood for a mystery. I know a lot of people love his writing, and I can see myself liking other things that he's written. Second last is another nonfiction book that I got to this month that, spoiler, was also really great, and that is Policing Black Lives, State Violence in Canada from Slavery to the Present by Robyn Maynard. Robyn Maynard takes the notion that anti-Black racism doesn't exist in Canada, that Canada is somehow immune to this, and smashes it into a million pieces in an incredibly well-researched, incredibly thorough, and incredibly compelling way. Like, there is no way that you can get through this book and not be like, Canada has a very serious problem when it comes to anti-Black racism. So she starts talking about Canada's history of slavery, which is something I knew nothing about. I learned nothing about in school. She looks at everything from policing in Canada to the education system to the welfare system. And again, I think it's something that's so important because we hear that so often. This idea that Canada is somehow better or some like anti-racist utopia, and it's wrong and it's incorrect and it's harmful because it prevents us from doing better. It's such a good book, it's such an important book, and the fact that it's contextualized in the Canadian context is so important because I think it is easy for Canadians to read things like Our Prison's Obsolete and think, oh, that's just an American problem, that doesn't happen here. Read this. That's what I have to say. Last but certainly not least for this month, we have The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. The Kiss Quotient follows our main character named Stella. Stella is an autistic woman working as an econometrician who has had some trouble with dating. So Stella hires an escort, a man named Michael, who she basically wants to teach her how to have sex in a way that will help her in relationships. Inevitably, sparks fly, and Stella and Michael, they catch some feels, you know what I'm saying? So this was, I loved this book. For one, it's a book written by an autistic woman about an autistic woman. That is not representation that you get very often in books. It challenges this idea that autistic people can't fall in love and can't be in loving and wholesome and very sexy relationships. I will say that this is the steamiest book I've read in a while, and I didn't really realize how steamy it was. Things that I would probably be embarrassed if my grandmother knew that I was reading. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. The book is intended to be a gender swapped pretty woman is kind of what the trope that it's playing off of. So maybe don't go into it looking for the most realistic, grounded in reality love story, but it's great for a lot of other reasons, and I thought it was really cute. And I really liked it. One thing that I would be curious to kind of hear about from other folks on this one was sort of the representation of sex work. I don't think it was problematic, but I also, that's not a lived experience I can speak to, so I don't know. And there was a line at one point that I thought was good, where Stella says to Michael, if this is the job that you want, I think you should be doing it and I wouldn't judge you, but if you don't want to do it, then you shouldn't have to, which I think was like a really good characterization, and I'm glad that that was something that was said. But Michael also has a lot of internalized shame about the job and thinks that people are judging him, and like, who says they're not judging him? I think it's just something worth noting. So that's that on that. Thank God I did not try to make these two videos one, because I've been speaking for a really long time, and if I had to talk about 8 more books right now, I would probably cry, and you would probably cry as well. So there's the first 10 books that I got to this month. In the next video, I will be sharing the other 8 books that I read that kind of fall more into the YA realm of books. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts were, what's your favorite book that you've read in September, and yeah, hope you're having a fantastic October so far, and I will see you again soon.